You're listening to Story Radio, the podcast for readers, writers, and lovers of literature everywhere. Today, we're speaking to Katie Willis, whose debut novel, The Quiet Act of Loving Bones, has just been published by Joan Publishing. Katie, welcome to Story Radio.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
First of all, would you like to tell us more about your novel and the story that it tells?
Yes, I think I would say that primarily it is a love story. It's a love story between two people, but I think it's also a love story for an art form. And the protagonist chooses to tell the story through chapters, and each chapter relates to a bone in the body because the protagonist is a dancer. So it's not exactly a linear form, but it does trace the protagonist's journey from childhood through ballet, which is her true love, and into sickness. And I think the title actually is quite important because originally it started as The Act of Loving Bones. But then I decided that the quiet word was quite important because to me, quiet is quite revolutionary in a way. There's a lot of quiet stuff that happens in the novel. Things happen underground or undercover, or things happen that one character knows about and then other characters don't. But I a little bit want to play with that word quiet because I suppose sometimes when people think of quiet, they think of someone who's shy and doesn't say much, but there's more to that word than that. I think it is quite a powerful word. So it kind of morphed from the act of loving bones to the quiet act of loving bones.
And how close is the book's narrator to you? Would you describe the book as fiction or autofiction?
I would say that it is autofiction because it has an autobiographical truth. A lot of it is based on me, Katie, the writer, but it does have fictional elements within it, and the trajectory of the journey of the protagonist is not exactly my trajectory. But a lot of the characters are based on people whose names have been changed, and perhaps some of the ballet characters are a combination of dancers that I knew, sort of shoved into one body. So they're not an actual person, but like a collective of individuals that I know. And I have played with timelines a little bit, so it definitely has fictional elements within it.
Yes, like Pirouette Betty seems a character who's very sort of all-embracing in that way.
I think she's probably my favorite character to write. I love Pirouette Betty, and she is actually based on a trio of people that I know as dancers, kind of made into one. I think I love her courage. She is very much who she is, and she's not afraid to be who she is, which I think is a lesson to the protagonist, actually. But Pirouette Betty, I love. Yeah, definitely.
And Mother M's a very powerful character.
Yeah.
She's someone who has strong religious beliefs, or at least a strong sort of she sort of prays and chants, but yet she seems to sort of struggle with some of the realities of everyday existence, or at least to be. She seems like someone who's a bit out of time. Can you tell us more about this character and the family dynamics of the book's narrator?
Yes, I think you're right about Mother M. When I started to create Mother M, I saw her as a very loud voice inside a timid body, which is perhaps the direct opposite of the protagonist, who has a very strong body but quite a quiet voice. And it's really interesting to me that as I was writing Mother M, I pictured her as quite squat and quite short in stature. And a couple of people who've read the book have got back to me and said, "Oh, Mother M, I imagine her as really tall and reedy and blowing in the wind," which is really interesting to me as a writer, how readers can take your characters and they can see them in totally different ways. But I think religion very much defines Mother M, and I was very interested in how it shaped her and how it shapes her body, because her body is not very fluid. I don't see her as a very fluid character. But then I suppose when I see religion one side of a spectrum, and then I see sort of family the other side of a spectrum. But there is a combination in there, because I think sometimes her religion is a little bit softer. It's not always a harsh thing. There is some rhythm to it. And despite her rather kind of disjointed body, sometimes the words that come out of her mouth are really they're astonishing, but at the same time, they're quite beautiful. And that combination is really interesting. But the family, I don't think the family exists as a unit. I think they're very much individuals, except apart from the sisters who perhaps have like a deeper relationship, the protagonist and Nell. But I think the thing that defines the family always for me when I was writing it was the space that they were in, like the room that they were in. Perhaps it was a kitchen or perhaps it was a living room. But that was the only thing that really tied them together, because they are all individuals living in their own little world. And the conversations that they have, I remember writing one in the kitchen with, I think it's Mother M, Nanny, and the two sisters. And they're all talking about totally different things, and the conversation layers on itself. And I suppose my inspiration for that is Shirley Jackson. We've always lived in the castle. She has two sisters in there, and she does it. She, the author, she does extraordinary things with language, and she sort of side slips into conversation from prose, and it's quite astonishing, but it works. And I suppose I was trying to do that with those four women, or the two older women and the two children in the kitchen. But there's definitely a sense that everyone is living in the same house, but living in totally different worlds.
Yes, I think that comes across quite strongly, even in terms of the father figure is a scientist, and he's a numbers man, and the sister is, does she want to be a painter? Is that right?
She loves animals a lot. So a lot of her talk is about animals and what animals can do and what they can't do and how they're different from humans. And she's also very good, very academic. She's good at everything she turns her hand to. I think that often happens in families. Well, perhaps not all the time, but you can have very different characters existing in a communal space, and somehow it has to work.
Yes, I mean they're related, but they don't necessarily have anything or very much in common. But like you say, I was quite interested with the when Mother M speaks to the narrator. She sometimes their language does echo each other, almost like a kind of call and response.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of way that they're communicating, but maybe on a sort of less less what's the word, earthly way.
Yeah, I think it's more subtle, and I'm glad you picked up on that, because there is a sense of echoing in that. That's repeated later in the novel with a different character. But they almost have their own language, sort of. Yeah.
Just on the sort of the theme of religion, there seems to be a sort of a tension in the book between the religious background, which is suggested by the figure of Mother M and some of the language in the book, and the sexuality of the narrator, who falls in love with another female dancer, C. As you say, it's a beautiful love story when she goes to ballet school. Is that a correct interpretation of the novel?
Yes, I would say it is a correct interpretation of the novel, and it was something that I thought about a lot. And when it comes to like religion and sexuality, I often have visual images in my mind when I'm writing, and I had an image of two women walking down a street who didn't know each other, but their coats would brush against each other. So there was sort of a meeting point, a communion of sorts. And that's what I was trying to do with religion and sexuality. I was trying to find out how they can meet, where they can meet. And I was trying to do it, I think, through rhythm and the rhythm of the prose. Because Mother M's religion, it shifts a little bit when she moves house and she's very excited to move house. In those early moments of her being in the new house, there's a beautiful lyricism to her words that hadn't existed previous to that. It doesn't last, but you can see the rhythm in religion. And so that's a little way I worked it in. And I think the protagonist herself, although religion isn't the main thing in her existence, there are times, especially when she falls ill, that she has to question what religion and what faith mean to her and how it will shape her life going forward. And me, Katie, the writer, I have a vague memory of learning lots of bits from the Bible when I was at school and doing religious knowledge. And sometimes I would read certain bits of it and I would memorize them, and they would almost be like a song because there is an undulation to them and there's a lyricism to them. And I think that was how I managed to have those two as separate, like two ends of a spectrum. So you have religion and then you have sexuality, but you can kind of mix them a little bit through the use of rhythm. They're never going to sit well together, but I wanted to kind of test that middle space.
I bet you were thinking of the King James Bible version
Yes.
with
Yeah.
poetic language.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You could almost make dances of some of those, or even of the Psalms. You could make dance from some of that because there is a rhythm and it sort of it's like the breath. It's kind of rising and falling.
The theme of bones is obviously central to the book, and that physicality ties the ballet story in with the disease story that emerges later. At what stage in the development of the novel did this appear? Did they provide the solution to a problem you were having in the novel, or was it more as though you began there and the novel grew from
I
there?
think Bones, totally Bones began it. Bones and the color yellow, those two concepts were very prevalent, and that was sort of how I began to even write the novel. Because I like the idea that you think of a bone as firm and hard because it's holding you up, but it's actually quite permeable and a lot of things run through it, which gave me the freedom to work with the dance and the movement and things running in and out of bone. And then I suppose there's another thing that bone is hidden inside skin, so it's not immediately visible. So you have to get to it through a layer, and that ties in with the whole quiet thing. So bones and yellow was the total beginning of this, and then I tried to work out, okay, well, where can I go with this? How can I tell this? How can I make each bone tell a story? And how can I articulate them so that they can tell a story that's not disjointed but has some kind of movement and makes a dancing body move, but also that makes a sick body move because a sick body moves in a really different way to a dancing body.
I'm going to quote a line from the book. Everything is lovely at the ballet. Everything is. Everything is. The narrator is obsessed with and immersed in the world of ballet, but as we know, it's a world that can make harsh demands on students, including expectations around weight, performance, and physical appearance. Can you talk a little bit about how your novel explores those tensions?
That is such an interesting question, and I'm glad that you raised that. I think I think there's a common misconception of ballet that it is very light and floaty. And in a sense it is, because if you watch it on stage, the dancers are on point and they are sort of floating a lot and jumping and sort of using the space in a way that maybe a normal human wouldn't use a space in normal life. But in order for that lightness to appear on stage, the body has to heavily train. So there's a lot of heaviness and a lot of long, heavy hours that go into making that lightness on stage. So in a sense, it's sort of a dichotomy. And I don't know that I actually did explore those expectations around weight, performance, and physical appearance in a very clear way. I think if I'd been writing like non-fiction, then I would have discussed that quite literally. But do, I do talk a lot about feet, and I talk a lot about point work and barefoot point work and how the toes get bloody and the situation of the feet. That's something that I touch upon quite a lot. And then I have one character who she doesn't play a big part in the novel, but she's quite important to me because she is often described around chairs. She has a love of chairs, and she's often moving chairs and sitting in chairs and talking to chairs. But her weight is often described in relation to her moving a chair or sitting in a chair. And I think that's kind of like a subtle question to the reader because it's like there's this tiny, tiny dancer who weighs 7 stone, and I'm describing her moving and shoving chairs around. And that's kind of like a little insinuation into weight and how small you have to be a dancer. And then there's one other thing that I did. I don't know if it directly ties into your question, but I made a conscious decision not to include a glossary of dance terms because throughout this novel there's a lot of dance terminology. And I know that people who come to this and they don't have a background in ballet, they are probably going to wonder what those dance steps are. So I had the choice to put in like a glossary where it would be very clear exactly what everything was, but that felt too rigid in the framework of the novel for me. So in a sense, that's an invitation. It's an invitation to the reader to step inside the novel, to make what they want or what they think is right of the dance step to them in that sentence. But the closer they step in, then they are a part of that conversation about weight, about performance, about physical appearance. So I'm interested in their view as well. And I suppose also to the protagonist, ballet is such an important thing to her that in a sense she shuts out a lot of the negative side of it. She sees it, but she's not really going to acknowledge it because ballet is everything to her. So all those little bits are ways I think that I sort of address those issues.
At one point, I think another character is begging her to eat more. She's drinking black coffee, and I imagine that that's pretty common in dance.
Yes, yes, there were dancers back in the day when I was dancing. There were dancers who just drank coffee and ate chocolate. I don't recommend it, and I think the world has shifted. The dance world has a lot of nutritional experts in it now, and there's more kindness, perhaps, in that profession than there used to be. And dancers themselves, they have to be more than ballet dancers now. They have to be able to do everything. So expectations are higher, but the support I feel is better.
Yes, that must make a difference because it comes across as to be in the ballet at the when you're as your character experienced it. It's immersive. It's an immersed world where you follow the rules around you. You don't really question those. You pursue excellence the way it's perceived to be, and and a demanding world.
It is demanding, definitely what you say, and you absolutely what you say. You do pursue excellence, and I think that if you don't love it, really, really love it, you would not stay in it. You would find something similar that you could use your creativity in. But there's a certain type of person that will do ballet, someone who can take the discipline because they have the love for it. The love has to kind of sit above the discipline, otherwise, it just is too much hard work.
The main protagonist loves the Russian ballet after her ballet teacher calls her Katya. I think she's a little girl then. And she eventually goes to Russia to study dance there. Can you tell the listeners a bit about the significance of Russia in the novel? I feel it's got a weight which I think is larger than just the I want to go and study in Russia. It's almost like a sort of adoptive nation, a kind of something that's much bigger than her.
Yeah, I think you're right there. I think it is bigger than that. Right at the beginning of this novel, Katia is obsessed with Russian dancers and the female dancers and the male dancers, and she learns all about them and when they were born and where they danced. So it became really important to me as the writer that I actually let her go to Russia. Alongside that, there is the true storyline that I, Katie, the writer, I did go to Russia and spend a bit of time there in a different, slightly different capacity to this. So there is a genuine truth to that. But I think it is more than that, and I think it probably carries the weight. I wanted to move her outside of England. I think it's important that she got out of her regular space in a ballet studio in England and she moved to a different country because she needed to solidify her feelings for C. And I don't think that she would have been able to do that had she have stayed in her original dance studio environment. And when she was in Russia, she meets a lot of Russian dancers, but she befriends a dancer called Belka, who is Russian, and English is her third language because French is the language spoken in a dance studio. So Belka's first language would be Russian, her second language would be French, and her third language would be English. So the dialogue that she has with the protagonist at that point is really, I think it's significant because, as you said earlier, with the echoing with Mother M and the protagonist, in this sense, we've got Belka, and Belka's English is is not brilliant. It's very, very good, but it's not brilliant. So you often find Belka breaking words up and breaking the protagonist's name up, and also echoing. There's that echo thing where the protagonist will say something and Belka will try and repeat it back to her. It's almost like she's trying to learn the English that the protagonist speaks. But by doing that, I think it gives the protagonist a chance to kind of break down the system a little bit that she was living in and build it up again as she and Belka build up dialogue together. So she can really work out how she feels about C. So that I think that not only the country, but also Belka, I think those two together are really significant.
I suppose the echoing of the language is a little bit like I imagine learning a dance, watching someone dance, and then copying the move yourself. That kind of echoing quality in the book does sort of remind me a bit of, well, watching ballet as a non ballet expert of any kind. Um,
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly true with the learning a dance step. You see it first and then you repeat it. Absolutely.
Speaking of Shirley Jackson, I'm so interested you mentioned her because, of course, we think of her as a horror writer. But that scene where the protagonist collapses during rehearsal for Cinderella because her foot has lost all feeling, that is a truly horrifying moment. And it did sort of, it gave me the shivers just reading it. Can you talk a bit about how the character adjusts to her new reality and how the novel tries to make sense of it?
First of all, I will say that that was perhaps, I think that was the hardest scene to write on many levels. Firstly, because I had to pare down the language and I had to strip back quite a lot, but I had to do it without it feeling clunky, which is quite hard to do. But also because it runs so parallel to my own personal experience as a dancer. It wasn't that specific ballet, but that is pretty much how it happened to me. So to write that onto a page, it took a lot of courage and it took a lot of being immersed in it and then stepping back from it to be able to do it. I don't know if there's any making sense of even throughout the duration or the rest of the novel. I think it's more a case of living with. And I say that as someone who wrote the book and also someone who lives with illness. The making sense, if it happens a lot after the actual initial experience. But what I tried to do there, taking my own experience in, is there is an urgency to illness and there's very much an immediacy. So in this sense, the protagonist is immediately and urgently involved in the fact that her foot doesn't work and then her legs. So it's moving up the body. So that is entirely where her focus is. And because that is where her focus is, everything around that immediacy and urgency gets a little bit hazy. So perhaps when readers read this, they're thinking, well, where are we? What is the season? What room are we in? What is happening? Because that all of that kind of falls away to the wayside. There's like a there's both a suspension and an acceleration of time outside of that immediate urgency. And I don't know if I managed to convey that on the page, but that is definitely a truth. So it's kind of like a sharp focus sitting inside an element of haze that sits all around it.
Yes, the character's trying to deal with a situation which has, I guess, shrunk her world to more closer to her body, and and the sort of the fear and difficulties of illness. Yes, I mean, but still with these beautiful kind of lyrical moments, which I just do think make it so powerful. And you don't go into the illness for very long. It's more of a sort of it's the kind of end note for the story in a way. Were you tempted to extend it further in time, or did that feel like a sort of natural point to finish the novel for you?
I think it had to naturally end where it ended, which in a sense is a circularity if you consider the beginning and the end. There is a circularity there. But I'm glad you picked up on that because when I was at the point the illness hit the character, I often have visual images. So I had at that point I had an image of a plane coming into land. So it's obviously towards the ending. But there's a shift in trajectory and there's a shift in placement of that plane coming in. So how do I convey that on the page? Because when the character first gets ill, she is ill for a long period of time. But when she's first ill, she's very young. And then the illness develops, she gets more ill, decades pass. How do I put that on the page? And I guess the question that was important to me at that point is there softness in illness? Because you've had this lyricism through ballet. Yes, ballet has a hard training, but there is a lyrical edge to it. Up on the stage, it looks light and soft. Now illness has come in. So how does this reshape it? Like, is illness hard? Is there any soft elements to it? Because I personally think that there is a softness to illness. It's not immediately present, and it has a speed to it. Softness has a speed to it, and hardness has a speed to it. So I had to somehow change the speed of the novel, finish it at the time I felt that it needed to be finished, and then also play with ideas like what does sickness do to memory? And what does it do to an elite dancing body? Because it might do different things to an elite dancing body than it would do to someone who was doing a different kind of job and what hadn't trained their body in an elite way, so they had control over every single muscle in that body pretty much, and then they lost control of every single muscle in that body pretty much. And I did play with the memory of the protagonist towards the end, partly because she's just so focused on illness and getting through it. She forgets things. She's unable to retain all that in her mind. And she's unable to retain some muscle memory of what dance feels like in her body. So she's kind of lost a lot of things. And I wanted to portray that, I guess, with a little kindness and not to just say, look, here is illness. It is a terrible thing. Deal with it, because it's way more nuanced than that. I don't like the idea of like a sick body being considered less than an elite dancing body or any other kind of body. And I had to work with that. And I think I learned a lot about myself. From that point onwards in the novel, I learned a lot about myself, about my own ideas about what being disabled means and what does it mean for the character. What does it mean to be sick? Are you going to view your own sick body in the way that the world views it? Or are you going to sort of shift things a little? And I hope that I managed to kind of put those questions in the minds of the readers. So I'm not saying sickness is terrible and an elite dancing body is perfect. It's way, way more complicated than that.
I think it does convey that. It conveys the interiority of illness very well, you know, and the sort of the feelings of being out of out of time and place, and you know, not understanding how your body works in this new scenario. I thought it was very powerful. And finally, what are you working on now, Katie? Are you having a break, or you have you got a new project?
I have had I've had this short story that I have written that I know is longer than a short story, or I knew it was, but I wasn't sure how it was longer and how I could make it longer. And then I had a medical treatment which was not pleasant in any shape or form. However, something good came out of it, which I think is so interesting that sometimes beautiful things could come out of terrible situations. And as a result of this medical treatment I'm able to lucid dream, which I've never been able to do before, which I'm hoping it stays because it's actually quite interesting and I quite enjoy it. But I'm not sure because I've just finished the treatment if it's a thing that's going to hang around. But what it has allowed me to do is previously when I was writing this short story, I was based on the ground and I was looking at the characters from the ground. But in lucid dreaming, I'm able to sort of get on top of the characters and behind them and above them and totally shift the makeup of that short story and see the possibility in it. Which, even as I'm saying this, I realize it sounds a little bit odd or extraordinary, but it is showing me progression and where things can go and how things can develop. So it's a beautiful thing.
No, I've once had that, a dream where I was with some of my characters, and I was actually one of my characters, and it was quite amazing. And sadly, it's not come back because maybe it would help me finish the thing. But
Maybe it will. Maybe it will.
yes, but so that's amazing. So you're working on that story at the moment, keeping it short form.
I am working on it and extending it and seeing where it can extend from and how it can move and extend out. I think it might end up being like a novella, like a short novel. Um, yeah, it has much more potential than it had before, so I'm super grateful for that.
We look forward very much to reading that as well. Oh, well, thank you so much, Katie. It's been fantastic talking to you, and thank you for being interviewed on Story Radio.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Now we'll listen to a short extract from Katie's novel, The Quiet Act of Loving Bones.
I stand in front of the river that carries her. My reflection is there, in the water. Our reflections are there. We are beautiful in the thighs. We are beautiful for turning out from the hips. She is not a ghost, I tell you. I am here, and she is here, and we are necessary. Love! I cry into the silence. What does love look like? Love is ballet. Love is the will of a supporting foot in a pirouette. Love is a knee held back in wonder. A storm of mosquitoes whip by, a riot of grey. They fly wild and skittish, which is the way I feel when I am with her. You have to know something, she begins. Her voice hangs somewhere in the middle distance. Something about what? I ask, leaning in. Something about us, she replies. A soft light breaks on the water. I move like a bell, tipping my head, tipping my breasts. I rub my thigh bone. I move my hand all over it. The thigh bone is a city because everything congregates there. Daffodil bones, she says. I melt. She has always loved me with yellow. She has loved me with daffodil yellow, which is no light love. It is a bold colour to live by. This is a rendezvous, I say. A rendezvous, she repeats. I feel her shift from river water into my own shadow. It is September, harvest time, time to gather what is good. September. I push my thumb into the soil, low to another September day in the past, a Wednesday. The weather was close that day. We gathered all the girls' costumes for the second act of Giselle and carried them out across the courtyard. She had one apple in her hand beneath the costumes and two tucked away inside a tracksuit pocket. She had taken 3 from the school canteen when you were only supposed to take 1. I've never been good with numbers, she said, before she winked at me. We were small and fierce, and I was gorging on every moment that had led me to carrying half an act of a ballet in my arms. I felt bountiful. My body felt bountiful. Until one of the costumes slipped from my hands and fell into a 2-day-old puddle beside the oak tree. I frowned. You've wet the shit out of that, she said. I bent and petted the tool the way you might pet a beloved dog. Do you think it's ruined? I asked. Probably not, she said, but you never can tell. I reached beneath the costumes for her hand. I felt the apple living in it. It's good to be surrounded by apples, I whispered. Beneath the wetness of the tool and the soft weight of her hand, there was quiet until she started laughing. Sometimes things happen before there is a name for them.
That was Katie Willis reading from her debut novel, The Quiet Act of Loving Bones. If you're enjoying Story Radio, please don't forget to rate or review us. Goodbye.